Hello, I'm Kads, and welcome to today's video. I hope you guys are doing well, because it is absolutely freezing cold up here in the Pacific Northwest. We're hitting like record lows. It's like in the 20s right now, so I am trying to stay warm, which is why I have my lovely hoodie on, but I digress. Today, we're going to be talking about the latest fusion, fragment summon, whatever you want to call it, for Esme the Dancer. Now, Esme is a Force Affinity Legendary Barbarian Support Champion, and for those who don't know, she is meant to be Esmeralda from the infamous story, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, and she is also the Valentine's Day fusion, which means she does have a pairing, that being Moto of the Peel, aka Quasi-Moto. But we're going to be focusing on Esme today just because we don't know if or how we could acquire Moto to have them pair up, and of course she's the only one who is currently fusible. So is Esme the Dancer going to be worth your while? I'll give you my thoughts after we run through her kit. Starting off with the base stats, she has a healthy amount of HP. It's nothing crazy, but 18k is pretty decent. Healthy amount of defense as well at the 1200, but a pretty surprisingly high base speed at 113. The highest in the game is 115. It's like a 4 or maybe an 8-way tie nowadays. But she's just below the fastest base speeds in the game, so just keep that in mind. And then she also gets a boost of the 10 accuracy. The base for most champions is 0. So starting off with her abilities on the A1, single target attack, but it will place increased attack on all allies for 1 turn, which is kind of unique as far as buffs on an A1, and it's all allies, not just the highest attack or something like that. So everyone gets increased attack. She can definitely be your increased attack champion for your squad. A2, AoE attack that places weaken and block buffs, and it will also decrease the turn meter of enemies by 20%. If the partner is on the same team, then it will steal a 20% turn meter instead. So right away when you see this type of ability, you're going to be thinking about Hydra Clan Boss, and obviously Uugo comes to mind as a pretty decent pairing. They overlap with block buffs, but in terms of Hydra, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but between the both of them, you'd have decreased defense and weaken, and then 2 sources of 2 different affinities for block buffs on a 3-turn cooldown, which can be very, very strong and very synergistic. On the A3, we have increased accuracy and increased speed on all allies. Granted, it's on a 4-turn cooldown, but nonetheless, she still provides those pretty good buffs. And then she has a 100% chance of stripping all buffs from all enemies. With her partner on the same team, however, she will steal all buffs from all enemies instead. So kind of like Gamoran's ability without the buff spread. So once again, a little bit more Hydra utility. Increased accuracy can help you land your debuffs. Increased speed can help maintain the speed of your team ahead of the Hydra heads. But it is once again on a 4-turn cooldown, which is a bit of a bummer, and there is notably no turn meter fill on this ability compared to like Eostrid or a Nekmothar. On the passive, she has 2 effects, one of which will always be there, and one of them is on a 1-turn cooldown. So the passive effect is that when she's hit, there's a 15% chance that she changes a critical hit into a weak, normal, or strong hit. So kind of like reaction, so to speak. But if her partner's on the same team, then it will increase to a 30% chance. I don't think that's the most useful thing. There's a little bit of RNG that might, effectively give you a reaction. But I don't think it's going to be that strong in most cases. And then the 1-turn cooldown active effect is that whenever she is hit, she'll increase the turn meter of the ally with the highest attack by 50%. So once again, thinking about Hydra synergy, just by her getting attacked with the multitude of AoE attacks from the Hydra heads, you're going to be boosting the turn meter of your attack-based champion, meaning they're going to cut in and do more damage potentially. And then she rounds it all out with a speed aura in all battles by 19%. So overall, I don't think she's a game changer per se, but nonetheless, I do think she's a pretty serviceable champion, particularly in Hydra, but I think she could also have a decent amount of utility in Arena as well. Coming in, assuming you have the partner duo, you could steal all buffs from all enemies, but even if he's not there, you can just remove all buffs, so it's a buff strip, and you place increased accuracy before you do it, and so you just have higher accuracy, which gives you a higher chance to actually remove all the buffs. So she could just be your opener buff strip ability, but also providing increased speed. And then if you happen to get around to a 2nd turn, you can place weak and block buffs and also decrease the turn meter of your enemies by 20%. And I think there could also be some pretty interesting cases where she happens to get hit and then someone on your team who is attack based cuts in just because of the turn meter a fill here on the passive. 50% turn meter boost is not a small quantity, so that can most certainly lead to you cutting in ahead of what the enemy might have planned to do. So in my opinion, I give her like a solid B-. She's like a mix of a Lady Kimmy with a little bit of Eostrid in there, but she is notably kind of weaker than both of them or either of them. So I think if you have either one of those two, she's just not going to be as strong or as useful on your account. And I happen to be in that category where I have Lady Kimmy and I have Eostrid, so I just don't really need what this champion brings to the game, but nonetheless, I'm still going to go for the Fragment Summon just because more champions is better, and there's always the potential to pull her later on for Faction Guardians, because for me, I'm still trying to get my first 10 out of 10, plus, you know, getting 10 out of 10 across all factions would be useful as well. So assuming that you are interested in securing this champion for your account, let's talk about how you can get it by hopping over to the Fusion Plan spreadsheet, which will be linked in the description box down below if you want to check it out for yourself. For the most part, we do have your standard breakdown for the events. We have the 4 dungeon split. We have 2 Classic Arena tournaments, a Champion Training Tournament, a Champion Chase Tournament, Dungeon Divers, 3 Artifact Enhancement, and Champion Training. But in this case, there's only one singular Dungeon Divers event, which is kind of a godsend, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. It's kind of a mixed review on said godsend. And then for this particular Fragment Summon, there is notably no Summon Rush, but there is a Hero's Path to replace it. And we have seen some fusions here and there. I think this is probably the 3rd or 4th time or iteration where there's been a Hero's Path as part of a fusion. So it's not unprecedented, but this is replacing the Summon Rush, meaning that some part of this is going to be summoning champions. One extremely important thing to keep in mind is that there are only 115 fragments up for grabs, so no matter what you do, you're going to have to participate somewhat in the Hero's Path, just because if you skip 25 fragments, you will be short of getting the Fragment Summon champion. So keep that in mind this upcoming weekend. At the bare minimum, you're going to have to at least get 10 fragments from the Hero's Path in order to secure the Fragment Summon champion, and that would be assuming that you're maxing out everything else. So just keep that in mind and plan accordingly. Other than that, the only other noteworthy things are the fact that there's an overlap, or what I call pinch points, which means there's an overlap between Champion Training and a Dungeon Tournament. So we're starting it off hot with an overlapping of a Champion Training with the Spider and Fire Knight tournaments, and then midway through the fusion, we also have Champion Training overlapping with Dragon and a little bit of Ice Golem, which just means that if you're trying to do both of them at the same time, you're just going to have to manage your energy more effectively. My prediction in this case is that the Champion Chase is going to be 2x Sacreds, but we'll find out probably sometime next week if that is actually the case, but that is my speculation just based on the rotation of the previous summoning events we've had recently. And then for those of you who are unfamiliar with this format of the spreadsheet, over here on the right hand side we have a list of all the milestones for all the different events and tournaments. Anything marked with an asterisk is a predicted value, meaning it is not yet confirmed, but it will be updated once it goes live in the game. And then anything marked with parentheses are the resources that I actually used on my account to get certain things completed. So if we scroll down a little bit, trip down memory lane, you can see that, for example, on Mad Hatter, I didn't pull any shards here in the first Summon Rush, but I did pull in the second one, and this is how much silver I spent on each of the artifact enhancements. So if we hop back in the game, let's talk about some of the current events going on right now. Starting off with my overall supply count at the moment, I do like to take a snapshot of my supplies, namely silver and gems, at the beginning of fusions and Titan events, just so I can summarize the deltas by the end of it to talk about how much resources a fusion actually cost me, because I know that there is an underlying assumption that you cannot do every single fusion in the game, but it is definitely possible if you budget your resources appropriately. So for this one, we're starting it off with around 98 million on the silver, and let's call it 4650 on the gems. So taking a look at some of the events that are already live, let's talk a little bit about my strategy when it comes to the events and tournaments. So Champion Training is usually my higher priority when it comes to these things. I did a good bit of it yesterday just because it was the first event, and notably the Dungeon Divers hadn't started. So I did hold off on using all of the energy from yesterday's reset, at least at the time of this recording. And so now I'm getting double dipping credit as far as running the campaign and getting Dungeon Divers points, while also starting on the Spider tournament today because the Dungeon Divers is officially live. For my intentions, I do plan to go all the way out here to the Legendary Tome, but if you want to min-max and only get what's required for the fusion, then you only have to go out to the 6100 milestone, which is about half of the Legendary Tome. So a lot of my energy is going to be spent chasing down that Legendary Tome. Then the Dungeon Divers that I kind of hinted at a bit earlier is definitely one of the more painful ones we've seen, but I guess the caveat, the trade-off is that there's only one, but just keep that in mind and plan accordingly. I'm going to kind of play this one by ear and just see how far I can get between the combination of running Spider over the next couple of days on top of the Champion Training over the next couple of days, and I do expect to at least get out to the 3600 for that milestone, but I'll have to see if it's worth it to chase the 4950, which is fairly steep for a 3 days divers event. If this was 4 days, 4950 would be still, you know, it still costs some resources, some gems and whatnot, but it would at least feel a lot more obtainable than 4950 over the course of 3 days. In other words, I don't want to end up spending like 1,000 gems trying to chase 5 more fragments when I could just pull a couple extra shards in the hero's path and just get more fragments from that and just skip this 5 entirely. So once again, I'll be playing that one by ear a little bit. And then for the tournaments, I kind of mentioned it earlier, but we do have the spider tournament that's already live, pretty standard milestone of 2250. And so I'll be making sure to do this over the next couple of days. And it's worth noting that the Queen's Fury tournament, which is starting fairly soon, is not part of the fusion. The event dungeons, thankfully, are never part of the fusion, so it's not mandatory for you to complete this. But if you do happen to be skipping the fusion, then perhaps this is where you should be focusing your energy instead and just trying to max that out to get as much pinpoint gear as you possibly can, because the dungeon is only going to be open for another 3 weeks or so, I believe. And I guess the other thing to point out is that CVC is live, and it is a PR CVC, and it's coinciding with Spider, which means it's a great time to be working on your Spider Hard Mode 10 teams, or just running your Spider Hard Mode 10 teams, depending on where you are in your progression. All right, so that's going to do it for my fusion plan for Esme the Dancer. Let me know in the comment section down below what you think of her kit, and are you going for her? I do think she's a pretty solid champion who can take the spot of an Eostrid Dreamsong, just because I know last year a lot of people ended up skipping that fusion, and so I would hope that if you're lacking some weakened champions, buff stripping, block buffs, synergy in your Hydra teams, then you should probably pick her up in lieu of skipping Eostrid Dreamsong last year. But if all else fails and you're not truly that interested in her kit, then I suggest you pick up as many fragments as possible and just bank them to convert into Maud fragments in case you haven't finished her already. Once again, if you'd like to check out the spreadsheet in more detail that we went over in this video, then it is linked in the description box down below. As always, if you did find this video helpful, then be sure to hit that like button down below. It really does help out the channel. And if you are enjoying the content on this channel, then feel free to hit that subscribe button as well for more content just like this one in the future. Thanks for watching, and have a good one.